So my first love of Tim Burton is Batman from 1989. The IMDb plot summary: The Dark Knight of Gotham City begins his war on crime with his first major enemy being Jack Napier, a criminal who becomes the clownishly homicidal Joker. So directed by Tim Burton, starring Michael Keaton, Jack Nicholson, and Kim Basinger. So we say first love. I mean, this wasn't the first movie that I saw of Tim Burton. I definitely would have seen Beetlejuice and Pee-wee's Big Adventure before that, but this was the first one where I really uh, associated the name with the aesthetic and realized, okay, Tim Burton, this is a director and this is what he does, because now I can connect it back to not only those other two movies, but his specific stamp on Batman to me was very distinguished and not anything I would ever would have expected. So, like I mentioned in this podcast before, because we've talked about Batman movies in passing, Batman's my favorite comic book character. I've always loved Batman since I was a kid, and my introduction to Batman was through the 1960s Adam West TV series, some early, like older comics from like the 60s and 70s I would be reading as a kid growing up. And then there was a cartoon show on TV called Super Friends, which was like a, very, very for kids version of Batman. And that's what I knew Batman was. And then this movie comes out and it's much darker, much more serious, a very distinct interpretation of Batman that was more gothic, was more goth, was more, Tim Burton. I'll use that word now.
Right.
But as a kid, I didn't know what that was. It's like, whoa, like this is Batman. Like what's going on? Like I didn't know that this could be Batman. And then I actually they used to do this back in the day. They had these magazines they would make and they would sell at a newsstand of like making of the movie. And I bought that because I love Batman. And there's a whole sort of spread in there with like Tim Burton, and I saw what he looked like, and he was, all in black and had this black, dangly hair and had his little black beret, and it was like interview with the director, and I was like, oh my gosh, like this guy, like this is the director, this is the guy who made Beetlejuice and Pee-wee's Big Adventure, and then I started really understanding like what his aesthetic was, getting to know him, associating the name with the picture. So that's why this movie has to be my first love with Tim Burton. And while I didn't see this in the movie theater, like I was too young, I think, to see this in the theater, it was definitely something when it was on video cassette. I rented it in a video store and watched it, and that is sort of what unlocked my not only obviously I love Batman, so double down on that for me because it's a great film, but really taught me who Tim Burton was because it was this different version of Batman, and because I saw him in that magazine and realized like, oh, this is like a cool sort of goth
Mm.
artist guy. Like I love this guy. But I'll talk more about the movie when we kind of get into it, but curious on what your thoughts of Batman when you first saw this movie. Sounds like you didn't see it in theaters either if you saw Batman Returns first.
Yeah.
But yeah, what was your introduction to Batman? And actually, I will say too, I mean, I didn't see it in the theaters, but I remember when this thing came out, it's a giant phenomenon. Like you
Oh,
couldn't
I bet.
escape it in the US. I'm curious if in India it was just as prominent with, Batman being everywhere, the Batmania summer of 89 that it
Yeah.
was.
Sort of. Although my memory of watching this movie is on VHS, but at some other people's house because they had older kids and they'd rented the VHS. And I just remember sneaking in and watching like a few images and just had some awareness that this is Batman and that meant something because I'd seen
Mm,
comic books and things like that. I don't think I'd watched any of the other cartoons. I did see the Adam West show, although I can't remember now if that was before or after, but
okay.
I have seen the show.
Hmm.
But then it also felt very dark to me and sort of like this is something I shouldn't be watching,
Hmm.
or this is not for me, or it's too dark and slow and what have you. And so I didn't really watch it until after watching Batman Returns because I was
Interesting.
so enamored by
Ah,
that whole
yeah.
experience that I wanted to go back and watch it and enjoyed it. And I guess now we can get into the movie a little bit.
Hmm.
And then I didn't watch it for all this time until preparing for this
Wow,
episode.
really? Oh.
Because the thing is that, this movie with Joker sort of stands in the shadow of the Dark Knight, right? When you get
Mm,
that
mm.
and you get this sort of superlative in our pop culture consciousness Joker portrayal by Heath Ledger, it's sort of hard to escape that. And for the longest time, like when I think of the Joker, when I think of the main Batman movie, I think of Dark Knight. So I
Hmm.
think this movie maybe suffered because of that, or at least it wasn't top of mind. But boy, watching this again was quite the treat. I I just when I was referring to earlier that There are moments when the camp and the seriousness and the loner person trying to fit in sort of all comes together and maps in a perfect way. I think for me it might be this one. I
Hmm.
almost made this my masterpiece. This is how enamored I was just rewatching this movie after this whole long time. And it sings across the board. All of the visual flourishes are there. This Art Deco kind of gothic
Hmm.
Gotham City that they've put together, the characters' motivations. I just think Jack Nicholson, I mean, there are famous stories of he didn't want to do the movie and got a massive paycheck and ridiculous demands in his contract, and he just did it. But this is an iconic performance. It actually feels, I'm very curious to hear from you. Now, I haven't read that many comic books, but it feels very true to that. Like the whole movie feels true to that, but more than its parts, and
Hmm.
that's credit to Tim Burton. The storyline, I think Keaton is great. Kim Basinger looks amazing. The chemistry is sort of off and odd, but maybe that's the point. So I don't know. I'm curious to hear more from you. But this movie, just from head to toe, from his character motivations, visual style, amazing score by Danny Elfman, iconic. You cannot
Hmm.
escape that. But also having some meaning behind it. And I think it taps into the fact that Batman is a weird dude. I mean, the whole thing is weird. Like, you are a rich guy, you live in a cave, you dress up in this thing, you go out and you beat people. It's quite odd. And I think this movie taps into that. I mean, who better than Tim Burton to tap into odd, but also has fun with it, which is kind of what's great. And this has always been a thing of the Joker and the Batman being sort of parallels. And I
Hmm.
think that part is also explored pretty well here. Because at some point you're like, who is the odd one? I mean, they're both pretty odd, actually. I mean, of course, one is evil,
Right.
but they're both pretty odd. And then the set pieces also just like deliver. One, actually, I should share that one memory that I did have from my childhood was of the balloon with the gas.
Oh yeah,
I
yeah.
That was in my head when I watched it this time. I was like, oh my gosh, I do remember this from a long, long time. It's pretty iconic, and the way they just pull that whole sequence off is absolutely amazing. Very earned and practical effects, and you're transported, but you're also having a good time. Like, I don't know, I could just go on and on, but it felt like this is how a superhero movie should be, actually fun, but also dark and something on his mind. And I don't know, it just felt perfect to me.
First off, in terms of your point about the, standing in the shadows of the Dark Knight, I definitely agree with that. And even that when I was a kid, this was the Batman movie that
Mm,
no one ever thought anything could be topped. And then Christopher Nolan came around, and me personally, and I mentioned this in one of our previous episodes too on Christopher Nolan, like the version of Batman that I liked was the version that he delivered on. And Batman can be a lot of different things, and Tim Burton just had a different take on Batman that worked and was the Batman for a long time. But for me personally, I definitely the Nolan movies are more of Batman for me.
mhm,
But this movie is still incredibly interesting and unique, and a different take on Batman that I still love and can enjoy. And I think that is a lot of it. It is to do with the Tim Burton take of, like you said, the Batman's weird, right? He's taking this weird aspect of the character. Like, yeah, he dresses like a bat, like he's a weirdo, he's an outsider, and that I think is why Tim Burton, as someone who loves outsiders and how does the outsider fit into the normal world, he's viewing Batman more in that lens. I mean, in this movie, Michael Keaton, even as Bruce Wayne, sort of plays him kind of awkward and weird, and he doesn't
yeah,
really fit in even when he's trying to charm, Vicky Vale. He's not suave. He's
yeah,
not putting on that air of like the elegant sort of party boy Bruce Wayne that Christian Bale does in the Nolan films. He's kind of weird, and he even in one part of the movie he's hanging upside down like a bat when he's sleep. Like and it's like that's so weird. The guy is weird. He's damaged, and I think that is the part of the Batman character that attracts Tim Burton because he's attracted to outsiders, and that's why he wanted to paint Batman in this specific way. So I think it makes him for an interesting take. And yes, there's the Joker dynamic too of he's also a freak who's an outsider too in the gang, and then he enacts the revenge on his boss, and then across all of Gotham because he's lashing out. So I think it's the Burton version of Batman, which is again, I think what made him so unique, Tim Burton to me when I first saw this film. But I think so much of this other stuff still, despite the me preferring the Nolan films as a Batman film, I think as a movie though, this thing is just so huge and
hmm
just so well done. Like the perfect kind of blockbuster in terms of the set design, like you said, the score. I think this might be one of Danny Elfman's best scores. I think still iconic
Yeah.
an iconic Batman theme, an iconic score, and there's sequences in this film that still are just so cool and just give me chills every time. A big one, even with the score and the Burton aesthetic, is after Batman rescues Vicky Vale and they're driving back to the
Oh
Batcave.
yeah.
And it's like through this dark woods that looks all
Amazing.
gothic and Tim Burton-y, and then the Danny Elfman score is kicking up, and the Batman mobile's driving through, and there's leaves flying everywhere, and it's just that is Tim Burton,
Yeah.
basically. Like that is his entire aesthetic. It's just so well done. And yeah, like you said too, Nicholson, incredible in this role. And I think, yeah, maybe some people might be complaining that he's just playing himself, or it's the Jack Nicholson dial up to 10. But yeah, it is. But so what? It works. Like no
Exactly.
one else could have delivered a Joker like this, even though, yes, I prefer the Heath Ledger interpretation of the Joker. I can see why people still think this is the best Joker. It's much like Batman, Joker can be a lot of different things.
Right.
There's not one way you can play the Joker, but I think Nicholson's performance here is awesome, and probably at the time was something that's pretty rare. Like a big actor like him
Yeah.
going
No.
out and doing a role like this with an untested director too. I mean, Tim Burton is his third movie, and he's been given Batman. Like that's crazy. A young kid, I think he was like 30 or something when he made this movie too. He's so young, and to come out and be working with someone like Jack Nicholson, who's like at that point even still a legend, film
Yeah.
legend. Just incredible what he was able to get out of him.
In fact, I feel like Jack being in the movie sort of elevates it and gives it a lot of heft. I think, and that's kind of part of the
Mm,
movie in an interesting way, even though he didn't want to do it. But I think it's important that he's there because everybody else, I mean, he has top billing in the movie, you know. The
hmm.
movie, it's
That's
actually
right.
more of his story than Batman's story. I mean, that's the other funny thing that Batman in both Tim Burton movies is a side character, in my
Right.
opinion.
Yeah, they don't give him an arc
No.
in on either of the Tim Burton films. And I think that is also maybe why, as a Batman fan, I can see a lot of flaws in the Burton
Yeah.
interpretations. And Tim Burton famously was not a comic book fan.
No.
He was like, I don't read comics. I didn't read Batman growing up. And you can kind of tell that he doesn't have an attachment to the 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 lore and
Yeah.
the character. He has an attachment to the aesthetic and
Right.
what the Batman went through this crazy thing, and he's a freak now. And then that is what Tim Burton latches onto. And even the things like the Batmobile's got guns in it, and in the next movie, Batman kills people and is sort of okay. And so I think there are things here as a
Mhm.
Batman fan that I feel like is not really right with the character, but so many other things work in this film that it's sort of, yeah, it's fine. Like Batman can be a different thing to different people, but yeah, I definitely get that sense, like you said.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hi there, it's Alex. If you like the review and discussion Karan and I just had, make sure you subscribe to our channel, Movies That Shaped Us, to get full episodes. Every other Wednesday, Karan and I review a new release and then discuss 6 other movies made by that film's actor or director and how they shaped us. Subscribe right now or follow our podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts via the link in the description below. Hope you join us for the journey.